All right, welcome back to Self Talk Garage, where today we've got another project for you. Or is it just the same project in another video? That's up to you to decide. Well, anyways, today, once again, we're back on the Ford. And I know I've told you all this before. I'm not sure if the video got uploaded, but I know I'm doing a lot on this old truck right now, but this is just my project for the time being. I've been kind of hooked on it for a little bit because, like I said, it's an old truck. Got it for $1,000, and considering it's a 7.3 diesel, you can guess the shape it was in. So this truck has came a long way since I first bought it, which I didn't start up and loading videos till probably 8 months later, so you didn't see all the initial changes that were made. But when I bought this truck, it didn't run. It wouldn't move under its own power. And frankly, it was, I guess the way someone put it to me it was a shitbox. So since then, there's been a lot of things that have changed. The truck's came a long way. It's really reliable at this point. I haven't had an issue with reliability. It's never left me anywhere. But recently, I drove this truck in all about 400 miles. As far as round trip, it was about 400 miles. The truck done great. Temperature stayed good. It drove good. Didn't give me any problems. It actually got better than I expected fuel economy. But something I noticed while I was on that drive was that my battery voltage wasn't running what it should. Don't get me wrong, when the truck was running, it's carrying about 15, 16 volts. And that's to the second battery because that's where I have my voltage gauge ran. So, but anyways, when the truck shut off, it drops to 12 volts, period. It never has more than 12 volts. At points, it's like 11.4, which, being the size batteries they are and the fact they are newer, it should be running around, between 12 and 14, ideally, is what the battery should be capable of holding. So, of course, that made me start looking at the battery terminals and things like that. So I decided I was going to change out the battery terminals. The wiring itself is fairly corroded, so I'm going to put on the terminals first. If the terminals don't change anything, we're probably going to replace the wiring as well, put some new wiring on it, which this is 2-gauge wiring. So you can still buy the 2-gauge terminals, but I decided, where I'm more than likely going to end up replacing the wiring at some point, that I was going to use marine terminals or boat battery terminals, which the terminals go on, then they have a wing nut to clamp them down. So what I'm going to do today is we're going to cut the old terminals off. Then we got to strip the wiring. Then I got some, all right, tell them.
Okay, it's video right there.
All right, so this is my daughter, and she wanted to show you what these are. So these are the marine terminals, as you can see. And then we got these, the battery cable lugs, which we're going to solder these on. So those are how we're going to do the wiring. Thank you, Boogie. So those is how we're going to solder everything on. And we're going to run the wiring. Then after that, my tack system, which I haven't really talked about it. I filmed a video on it, and I just haven't gotten to upload it yet. But I'll probably upload it right after this video. So, but my little tack system or computer monitor I have in there has got some bad connectors, and it's causing it all to short out. So we are going to put these on, which these are just shrink wrap. I've always called it's a male bullet connector is what it is. So we're going to put the male and female bullet connectors on that tack system to replace the factory plugs and hope that fixes it. If not, we're going to have to go buy a couple new sensors, which ain't a big deal. They're about $6 for the 2-wire pressure sensors and temperature sensors at AutoZone. So it's not a huge deal. They're relatively cheap, but I still honestly think it's probably the connectors, considering the wiring isn't that old. So I'm going to get y'all set up and turned around, and we'll get started on this. All right. So you can see I got the solder up there, a couple of my lugs. So the first wire I'm going to do is this negative. which this terminal obviously don't look too bad, but this one you can see where the lead and everything's actually peeling off. And the other two terminals, one has a screw in it for some reason. So what I'm gonna do is go ahead and get these unbolted. I'm gonna get this up, and then I'm gonna take the snips and I'm just gonna cut it off. And then we're gonna get it stripped, and then we're gonna start getting our lugs set up. My terminals, they're all 13 millimeters. There's one that's a 12 millimeter for some reason, so I'm guessing that one's been, maybe the bolt or the nut has been replaced at some point. I mean, you can tell they've been on and off quite a few times by somebody. Alright. Alright. So, like I said, I'm going to pull it off. Then I've got a little terminal cleaner that I'm going to go ahead and clean up the terminals with while we're at it. And the way I've always been told to do this, you just push it on and you turn it in the same direction. That's what I was always told. I don't think it really matters much to go the opposite direction, just personal preference on that. You stick it on and you spin it. And as you can see, that terminal is very clean now. Blow some of the dust away where we brushed it off. All right, so these lugs here are fairly large. So these are for the positive terminal because the stud on the positive is quite a bit bigger. So well, I set it down over here. Oh, I already had it in my pliers. This is the wire lug for the negatives. And as you can see, positive, negative. You can tell the holes are quite a bit different sized. So they do the same thing. It don't really matter. If it came down to it, I'd probably drill this hole out if I had to, but I don't. So this is our negative, and these two are for the positive. So we're going to go ahead and cut this wire off of this negative terminal. And the way I'm going to do it, which these are more like tin snips, but they'll do the job. I'm just going to have to work at it a little bit. So I'm going to try to cut these off as close to the terminal as possible. Which, of course, the way this is going to work, I mean, obviously, it's not going to be the most beautiful cut in the world. But as long as it gets off there, I'm fine with it. And like I said a while ago, if this doesn't fix our voltage problem, then I'm going to have to order some more wiring. Because if I replace the wiring itself, it's going to go back to the factory specifications, which is 2 gauge. So there's our negative terminal. We got it cut off. Now the only thing we have left to do is get the insulation off of this wire. And I'm just going to use a pocket knife. Mainly because that's what I have. That will strip wire this big. And, I mean, you can see the corrosion coming out of this as I'm stripping it. Like, you can see it's all over my hand now. This wire's had its days. Of course, this truck's well over 20 years old at this point, so. Just try to do a clean cut all the way around. That's just personal preference. All right. So now that we got that, we're going to make sure it fits into our lug okay, because these are 2 gauge lugs, but they do look small, don't they? There's no... I looked this up on the internet. There's no way this is below 2 gauge. For 2 gauge cable. Like, that's nuts. How does it not fit? So anyways, as you can kind of see, I ended up having to trim some of this wire. Even though these lugs are the same gauge as the wire I have, they still weren't big enough. So, we ended up having to trim them up a little bit. As you can see right there, I had to kind of trim the outer layer off, which the way I've got that outer layer trimmed, once I slide the lug on, that little flare at the bottom of the lug catches everything at the bottom of the wire. So it's all going to be in contact with the lug, so it should all still get a good ground. What I've also done is I've already trimmed up a fairly large piece of shrink wrap, which I use the Marine Shrink because I like it. It's got like a glue on the inside of it, and I think it does a really good job of sealing everything off from the weather. So, and it doesn't cost any more or any less than the other stuff, so I just rather buy this than the other. The only thing I don't like about it is very sticky. Regardless, it sticks to about, as you can see, the insides that's got that glue on it. It's kind of hard to get slid down or over your wire. So that's one thing I'll warn you about. Be prepared for that, because it is fairly sticky stuff. And I'm sorry about the camera zooming in and focusing all crazy. It's a new camera and I'm just trying some new features out on it. And right now we have it on autofocus. So yeah, that's why it keeps changing up. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and get this wire. I need to get it down and around. Hang on. All right. So we got it down and around. And I kind of want it to be pointed upside down, so I'm trying to get every bit of slack I can out of that bottom. Because once we get this lug heated up and filled with solder, at that point we're going to have to get the cable put into it before the solder decides to dry or harden. So I'm going to go ahead and get my pliers. We're going to get our lug. And we're going to get ready to get going on this. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to start heating this lug with my propane torch, and I'm going to feed it solder until it's roughly halfway full. At that point, I'm going to bring it over here, and we're going to get the wire fed into it, and hopefully everything works out. Because as you can see, it's still a very tight fit, and I have to put some effort into getting that on, but I'm hoping once I heat it, it won't be that bad. Which I'm also going to have to heat the end of the wire too, so the solder doesn't harden immediately on contact. Because we don't want it to get hard immediately. We want to have enough time to get it fed in and in place completely before the solder decides to harden. And another thing is, if you're doing this yourself at home, you want to make sure you have your lug set up to where once you get to your terminal, it's sitting the right way. You don't want it to be sideways where you have to get the wire twisted to do it. You want to get the lug positioned to where once it's here, it's in the right spot, and you don't have to mess with anything or put a bunch of pressure on anything in order to get it put in the right place, the right direction. So I'm going to get everything set up for this torch, and then I'll get y'all back. All right, so next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get a decent, I have fine wire solder, so I'm just going to go ahead and get some pushed down into our lug. Of course, the lug isn't warm yet. We're just shoving it in there hardened. Just go ahead and get us some in there and built up. All right, I'm gonna assume that's a decent little amount there. Shove in a little more. And I think that'll be probably our halfway point. Like I said, you only need about halfway, otherwise you're going to have solder pressed out all over the floor. Which either way, you're more than likely going to have excess overflow. That's just part of it. But if you can prevent some of it and save yourself a little bit of solder at the same time, why not? Alright, so I know I'm positioned over top of this battery. Something I'm going to tell you. Make sure you don't have heat going directly on the battery. So I'm gonna turn the camera a little bit. And I'm gonna do it right here over the front of the truck. And yes, that's my kiddo playing in the background. But as you can see, try to get you set up to where you can see it. That solder melts practically immediately. You just hit it with the heat. And you can see down in there we done got a small puddle. Not as much as I was hoping. So we're gonna go ahead and let that harden. And then we're gonna start feeding in some more. This is easier if you have a vise or something, but I don't. So, alright. There you go. Oh, we're missing. Alright. Like I said, you just get it hot and you just keep feeding solder until you're satisfied with the amount, and at that point you go ahead and get your wire jabbed in. Which where this solder is so fine, I am having to use a lot of it. I kind of wish I had a little bit thicker solder wire on hand, but I don't. So y'all know how it is. You use what you got. And next time I'll take all this into account and probably get a little bit thicker solder wire. Alright, that's about halfway. So I'm going to kill my torch. Go ahead and let this get solidified so that way we can mess with the wire. And as you can see, it's halfway, a little over. So we're going to go ahead and let it solidify, re-solidify, and then we're going to heat our wire up, and then we're, like I said, get our wire heated up, and then we're going to shove the wire into our soldered lug here. So when we get ready to do that, I'll bring y'all back. Our solder solidified, which, as we know, that solidifies fairly quickly. Now I'm going to turn the torch on very low. We don't need it real high for this. We're going to point it away from the battery cable, and we're just going to put some heat on it. It'll help clean off some of that corrosion and everything else, all while we're getting the wire heated up. So that way, once we put it into our solder, we don't have any issues. Which you could always use electrical contact cleaner. It does the same thing. Which I'm not trying to burn it, I'm just trying to put some heat on it. Alright, so we got that heated up good enough, in my opinion. We're going to reheat the lug. And once we get our lug heated back up, we're going to feed the wire into the lug. And then we heat up our shrink wrap and it's all done. Now we're going to take our wire that we just heated and we're going to shove it in. And be careful of where this solder is going to land, because yes, it is hot. You do have to be cautious or conscious of what's going on. Alright, so we didn't get that heated up enough. I can only get it about 2/3 of the way in, so I'm going to go ahead, reheat this lug, and then we're going to get the wire put in again. I'm going to go ahead and do this heat off camera so I can better see what I'm doing. Fairly hot. I'm going to feed in a little bit more fresh solder to make sure we didn't burn off too much with that torch. Because yes, solder will burn once you get it hot enough. Alright, lug's hot, solder's in. So now we're going to take it, try to get it lined up the best we can, and just shove it in. There we go. And now we just wait for it to harden. Which, as you can see, we have the overflow on it, which from the angle I was at, y'all couldn't really tell. But we got some overflow. All we're going to do with the overflow is go ahead and take that torch, blow over it one more time. And then once we do, all that excess is going to just fall off. And then we'll slide our heat shrink up and over this lug and shrink it down. And this wire here is ready to rock. So we've given this time to cool, which, as you can see, I can touch it. It's hardened up, as you can tell. Now what we're going to do, because of this excess wire, is we're going to go ahead and hit it with the torch again just to knock off that excess solder. And then we're going to move up our shrink wrap, and we're going to go ahead and heat it, and then this wire will be done. All right, that got the big droplet off the bottom, and that's honestly what I was concerned about. So now that we got off that bigger droplet, we're gonna go ahead and try to move our shrink wrap, which I actually did heat it a little, so I'm hoping we still can move it. From the looks of it, it didn't harden, it's just being a booger. Which, like I told you, this stuff is fairly sticky, so you just kind of work your fingers over it. And my light just went off, so let's get that turned back on. There we go. And like I say, you just kind of keep working it up, and eventually you'll get it worked back over the existing wire insulation and over whatever it is you're working on. And then at that point, you just heat it with a lighter or a torch. And since I have the torch on hand, I'm more than likely going to use the torch again. And as you can see, this is getting caught on that solder a little bit. So I'm just going to kind of pry it up and over. Maybe stretch it just a hair, I guess you could say. And now we're going to continue bringing it up. We're almost there now. And as you can see, I mean, it moves little by little, but eventually you'll get it where you want it. Right. And as you can see here, I like to put it up closer to the opening, cover up the rest of the connector, because we don't want it to be grounding out randomly or hitting anything it's not supposed to. Then now that we have that done, like I said, you can use a lighter or a little butane torch, whatever you want. I'm just going to use this propane torch because it's what I have on hand. And you don't have to get it very hot, you just get it warm and it'll start doing its thing. And as you can see, you just give it a little bit of heat and there you go. And yes, this stuff can burn, and you will burn it if you get it too hot, so you want to be careful. I'm just trying to make sure I get it completely shrunk, because I want to have a good watertight seal, like I said. And as you can see right there towards the bottom, you can see where some of that sealant's getting pushed out, where I shrunk wrap it. That's that glue or whatever's in here I was telling you about. It gets pushed out, and then you have a watertight seal all around. And that's what you want. So, now that we got that, hang on, let me get you readjusted here. Alright, we got our negative terminal right there. I already slid it on. I didn't tighten it up. And we are using marine style terminals or boat terminals, which you can use any type of terminal you want. These are just what I'm using because for what I'm doing, they were the easiest to make work. You can buy this whole positive and negative wiring set for these trucks off of the internet for about $125, I believe, or $140. But I didn't need that but especially when I can turn around and I can just buy these lugs and a couple other things, and all in all spend about $25. And my light cut out again, so let me get that turned back on. All right. So like I said, $25 later, here we are. So I'm not going to tighten this terminal all the way up until we get our wire lug put on, but I am going to go ahead and get it snugged up some. All right. And remember, I pulled my negative over top of my positive wire just for convenience of the time. It made it more convenient for what I was doing. And there. Now I got that on. We're going to go ahead and bend this lug just a little because it has a bend up to it, and I don't want the wire being arched up. I'd rather it be pushed down. So realistically, I might try to flip it over like that, which it's not going to let me because, like I said, monitor the way you're wiring it, your lug goes on, so that way you know you don't have to twist or manipulate the wire. All right, so now that we got that, I'm going to once again bend that lug just a little more. We're going to tighten up that wing nut. And I personally like the wire being positioned like this. I just think it looks a little neater and cleaner overall because it runs in line with the side of the battery, all while arching directly under the positive. So now that we got it set up where I want, you just tighten down this terminal. And remember, if you're changing out your battery terminals, you don't have to put it so tight that the terminal is actually being bent. We've all seen it. For example, we'll take this old terminal, and you can see where somebody's, for one, beat the crap out of it. But for two, you can see how these ends here are kind of mushroomed or squashed in. You see what I'm saying? They got to bend in towards the top. And that's where they were over tightened. You don't have to do that with your battery terminals. Literally, this one's just snug, and I already can't move it. And that's all you have to do is get it tight enough that it clamps and stays in place. You don't have to He-man it, because all that does is damage your terminal and then ultimately cause you to have to replace it. And since these are wing nut terminals, I'm going to take my wrench, and as you can see, I'm kind of rotating that wing nut a little more. And that's all I want to do. And that's plenty tight enough. I can't really move the wire anymore. Hang on, give it just a hair more because I still wiggled that terminal just a bit. And there you go. And that is one lug out of 4 on this truck. So now that we got that done, I'm going to go inside and take a break because once again we live in Kentucky and it is cold out here. And my daughter's playing and I shut the heat off because it's so loud y'all can't hear me. So we're going to go inside, warm up, take us a little break, and then we'll come back to do the next one. Because this positive is going to be the most fun. As you can see, we got 2 of the 2-gauge wires coming up and in. And as you can see, this wire's been burnt, cooked, corroded, and everything else. All right. So the way I'm doing this is going to work. Obviously, it's going to work. But realistically, I'm just not happy with it. It's not the way I personally would like it to be. I want it to be better because the way it looks, I'm going to end up having to do all of this again. And it's like I've said in previous videos, you do it right the first time, so next time you ain't got to worry about it. You never have to worry about it again. Just go ahead and do it right the first time around. So, with that being said, I've gotten online, I've been looking up a couple different things, and I do think I'm going to end up changing this again. So for right now, I'm going to go ahead and leave this one lug and terminal the way it is, but I'm going to get online and I'm going to order some different terminals and some different battery cable. So I'm going to rerun the cable, redo the terminals, redo everything, essentially. Just go ahead and put new wires on it. And like I said, do it right, I guess now the second time. So that way I don't have to do it again. So with that being said, I am going to go ahead and upload this video to show y'all what I done and how it didn't work out. Because, you know, not all this stuff always works out the way you expect it to. It doesn't always go the way you want it to, regardless of how much you hope for it. Sometimes things just don't go the way you expect. So with that being said, I'm going to get online, and hopefully in the coming week or so, we can go ahead and get it done the right way. And I can show y'all whatever I come up with. So remember, this is Self-Taught Garage, where I don't always get it right the first time. So like, comment, subscribe, and hopefully we'll see y'all on the next one.